The metal doors of the space station slid open with a loud hiss. Commander Nari stepped through, her tall crystal body catching the bright lights of the hallway. She was 8 feet tall and made of what looked like living glass. Purple light moved through her body like blood through veins. When she walked, the floor shook a little. The guards stepped back. They always did. Even the brave ones could not help themselves. Nari had been doing this job for many years. She knew the effect she had on other beings. Fear was her tool, and she was very good at using it. "Where is the human?" she asked. Her voice sounded like wind through broken glass. The station commander, a short blue alien with 4 arms, pointed down the hall with one shaky finger. "Cell Block 7, Commander. We have kept him there for 3 days now. He has not said anything useful yet." Nari nodded. She had read the files on the way here. Captain Jiho Park, human male, age 45. He ran a small trading ship called the Lucky Star. The Federation had caught him near the outer edge of known space. They thought he was carrying weapons to rebel colonies. They needed proof. That was where Nari came in. She was the best at getting information from prisoners. No one could resist her for long. The longest anyone had lasted was 6 hours. That was a Craxi warrior who was famous for being tough. Even he had broken down crying in the end. Humans were new to the galaxy. The Federation had only known about them for 10 years. They seemed weak compared to most other species. They had no natural armor, no claws, no poison. They could not read minds or shoot energy from their bodies. They were just soft, pink creatures who lived short lives. This should be easy. Nari walked down the long hallway. Her footsteps echoed off the metal walls. Other aliens moved out of her way without being asked. Some of them started shaking just from being near her. A few ran away completely. She stopped at the heavy door marked Cell 7A. The guard next to it was sweating, even though the station was cold. "Open it," Nari commanded. The guard's hands shook as he pressed the buttons. The door slid open with another hiss. Nari stepped inside. The cell was small and gray. There was a simple bed, a toilet, and one chair. The walls were made of thick metal that could stop most weapons or powers. In the middle of the room sat the human. Jiho Park looked exactly like his picture. He had black hair with some gray in it. His face had lines that showed he smiled a lot. He wore simple clothes, a blue shirt and dark pants. He was not tied up. There was no need. The cell was escape-proof. Nari expected him to look up in terror when she entered. She expected him to gasp or scream or try to hide. She had seen it thousands of times before. Even the bravest warriors felt her power the moment she walked into a room. Instead, Jiho looked up calmly. His dark eyes met hers without fear. He even smiled a little. "Hello," he said in a friendly voice. "You must be Commander Nari. I heard you were coming." Nari stopped walking. This was not the reaction she expected. Most beings could not even speak when they first saw her. They were too busy trying not to wet themselves. "You know who I am?" she asked. "The guards told me. They seemed pretty scared of you." Jiho stood up slowly and stretched his back. "Long trip here, I bet. Would you like to sit down? That chair looks more comfortable than this bed." Nari stared at him. In all her years of doing this job, no one had ever offered her a chair. No one had ever asked if she was tired. Most beings were too terrified to think about anything except their own fear. "I am here to question you," she said, letting some of her power leak out. The air in the room grew heavy and cold. Purple light began to glow brighter in her crystal body. You will tell me what I want to know. Jiho nodded. Okay. What would you like to know? I run a trading ship. I buy things in one place and sell them in another. Pretty simple business, really. The calmness in his voice confused Nari. She increased her power output. The lights in the room began to flicker. Frost formed on the metal walls. This level of psychic pressure had made grown Thraxians faint. Jiho noticed the frost. Wow! You can control temperature too? That must be useful. Do you ever use it to keep drinks cold? Nari's crystal body flashed with anger. I am not here to discuss drinks. I am here to break your mind and make you confess your crimes. What crimes? Jiho asked. He sounded genuinely curious, like he was asking about the weather. I haven't done anything wrong. I was just flying through space when your ship stopped me. You were carrying weapons to rebel colonies, Nari accused. No, I wasn't. I was carrying medicine to a hospital on Kepler Station. I can show you the shipping papers if you want. Nari had read those papers. They looked real. But papers could be faked. The Federation needed more proof. They needed a confession. She focused all her power on the human. Wave after wave of pure terror filled the small room. This was enough psychic force to drive most beings insane. The metal walls began to crack from the pressure. Jiho blinked a few times. Are you feeling okay? You look like you're straining yourself. Maybe you should take a break. For the first time in her long career, Commander Nari felt something she had never felt before. She felt confused. How was this weak little human resisting her power? It should be impossible. She tried again, pushing harder. The lights went out completely. The only light came from her glowing crystal body. Ice covered everything in the room except the space right around Jiho. Seriously, Jiho said, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. You should rest for a minute. This looks like hard work. Nari stopped pushing. She stood there in the dark, breathing hard. Her crystal body was getting hot from the effort. She had never had to work this hard before. What are you? She whispered. Jiho smiled again. It was the same friendly smile from before. I'm just a guy who sells things and tries to get home to his family. Nothing special about me. But Nari knew that was not true. There was something very special about this human. Something that made no sense at all. Outside the cell, guards were gathering. They could feel Nari's power even through the thick walls. They had never felt her use this much force before. Some of them were already calling for backup. Inside the cell, Jiho sat back down on his bed. So, what else would you like to know about my business? Nari had been questioning prisoners for over 200 years. She had broken the minds of warriors, generals, and even other psychics. She had made entire armies surrender just by walking onto battlefields. Fear was not just her job, it was who she was. But this human was different. Very different. She spent the next 4 hours trying everything she knew. First, she tried the basic fear response. She made the room feel like a tomb, dark and cold and final. Most beings started crying within minutes when she did this. Jiho asked if she needed a sweater. Then she tried specific fears. She projected the terror of falling into empty space, of being crushed, of being burned alive. These were fears that existed in almost every species. They were written into the basic code of life itself. Jiho's heart rate stayed the same. His breathing did not change. He even started humming a little song. "What is that music?" Nari asked, frustrated. "Oh, just something my daughter likes to sing. She's 8 years old. Very smart kid." Jiho's face lit up when he talked about her. "She wants to be a doctor when she grows up. She practices by taking care of her stuffed animals." Nari tried not to listen. She focused on his mind, looking for cracks. Every mind had weak spots, things that scared the person more than anything else. She found his memories of his family and pushed against them. She showed him visions of his wife dying, his children in danger, his home burning. These were the deepest fears most parents carried. They should have broken him instantly. Instead, Jiho sighed. "Yeah, I worry about that stuff all the time. Keeps me up at night sometimes. But worrying doesn't help them, does it? I just have to do my best and hope everything works out." "How can you be so calm?" Nari demanded. Her crystal body was now glowing so bright it hurt to look at. "I am showing you your worst nightmares." "Well," Jiho said thoughtfully, "I guess I've already thought about most of this stuff. When you love people, you can't help but worry about them. My wife Sujin, she's probably worried about me right now, but she's tough. She'll take care of the kids until I get home." Nari stopped her attack. She was breathing hard, which was strange because her people did not usually need to breathe much. "You think about these terrible things on purpose?" "Not on purpose, exactly. But yeah, the thoughts come. When Mira was born, I spent weeks thinking about all the things that could go wrong. When Daiho started school, I worried about bullies and accidents and whether he would make friends. When Sujin goes to work, I worry about her drive home. And this does not drive you insane?" Jiho laughed. It was a warm, real sound. "Drive me insane? No, it just makes me human. We all worry about the people we love. It's part of the deal." 3. Levels up from the prison cell, Dr. Hana Lim was watching everything on her computer screen. She was one of only 12 humans working for the Federation. She had spent years studying alien minds, trying to understand how different species thought. Now she was watching something that made no sense at all. The computer showed Jiho's vital signs. His heart rate was steady. His brain waves looked normal. The stress hormones in his blood were at regular levels. According to every scientific measure they had, he was completely calm. But the computer also showed what Nari was doing. The amount of psychic energy she was putting out was incredible. It was enough to kill most beings. The walls of the cell were cracking. Ice was forming on the metal. The temperature had dropped 30 degrees. Hana had studied Nari's abilities before. She knew what the Vextai commander could do. She had watched recordings of other interrogations. Strong warriors had been reduced to screaming children in minutes. So why was Captain Park asking if Nari wanted some water? Hana picked up her communication device. "This is Dr. Lim. I need to speak with Station Commander Vexla immediately." While Hana was making her call, the interrogation continued. Nari had moved on to cosmic fears. The terror of being alone in an endless universe. The horror of death and meaninglessness. These were fears that went beyond any single species. They were the fears that came with being alive and aware in a vast, uncaring cosmos. Jiho listened politely while she explained these concepts. When she was done, he nodded. "Yeah, that stuff is pretty scary when you think about it. I remember when I was younger, I used to lie awake thinking about how big space is. Made me feel really small." "And now?" Nari asked. Maybe she had found something that would work. "Now I figure the universe might be big and scary, but I've got my little corner of it. My family, my ship, my work. I can't control the whole universe, but I can control how I treat the people around me. That seems like enough." Nari felt something crack inside her mind, not from strain, but from confusion. How could this creature be so small and weak and still not be afraid? Every other species in the galaxy understood their place. They knew they were tiny specks in an infinite darkness. That knowledge made them afraid. It made them controllable, but not this human. "You should be terrified," she said, and for the first time, her voice sounded uncertain. "You should be begging me to stop. You should be telling me everything I want to know." "Well," Jiho said, "I would tell you if I knew anything useful, but I really was just delivering medicine. I've got a daughter who might need doctors someday. I wouldn't do anything to hurt hospitals." Dr. Hana Lim burst into the observation room above the cell. Station Commander Vexila was there, along with several other Federation officers. They were all staring at the screens in shock. "Commander," Hana said, breathing hard from running, "you need to stop this interrogation right now." "Why?" Vexila asked. "Commander Nari has not gotten the information yet, because she's not going to get it, and if she keeps trying, she might hurt herself." On the screen, they could see Nari's crystal body starting to flicker. The purple light inside her was becoming unstable. She was pushing her powers harder than ever before, but getting nowhere. "What do you mean?" Vexila demanded. Hana pointed at Jiho's readings. "Look at his brain scans. He's not resisting her powers. He's absorbing them. Everything she's throwing at him, he's already carrying around in his head anyway." "That is impossible." "No," Hana said quietly. "That's human." In the cell below, Nari made one final attempt. She gathered every bit of power she had and focused it into one overwhelming wave of pure terror. It was enough psychic force to level a small building. Jiho felt it wash over him like warm water. He looked up at Nari with concern. "Commander, you really should rest. You're going to hurt yourself if you keep this up." For the first time in her long life, Commander Nari, terror of the galaxy, sat down hard on the floor and started to cry. Nari sat on the cold floor of the cell, her crystal body dim and flickering. Purple tears rolled down her face like drops of liquid light. She had never cried before. She had not even known she could cry. Jiho got up from his bed and walked over to her. He moved slowly, like he was approaching a hurt animal. "Hey, are you okay?" "Stay back," Nari shouted, but her voice cracked. "I am dangerous. I am the nightmare that haunts entire star systems. Right now, you just look tired," Jiho said gently. He sat down on the floor next to her, but not too close. "Want to talk about it?" Nari stared at him. In all her years of life, no one had ever asked if she wanted to talk. No one had ever sat with her when she was upset. People either feared her or used her. That was all she had ever known. "I do not understand you," she whispered. "I have used powers on you that have destroyed the minds of the strongest warriors in the galaxy. You should be a broken, sobbing mess. You should be begging for mercy." "I probably would be," Jiho admitted, "if I didn't have practice dealing with scary things." "What practice?" Jiho smiled, but it was a sad smile. "You know life. Being a husband. Being a dad. Running a business. You learn to handle fear when you have to." Nari's tears stopped flowing. She looked at him with confusion. "Explain." "Well," Jiho said, settling back against the wall, Take my wife, Soo-jin. When I first asked her out, I was terrified. What if she said no? What if I made a fool of myself? But I asked anyway, because sometimes the thing you want most is on the other side of something scary. That is not the same as cosmic terror. Maybe not. But then we got married and I had to. Worry about making her happy, about being a good husband. Then we had kids, and suddenly I was responsible for these tiny, helpless people. You want to talk about fear? Try holding your newborn baby for the first time. They're so small and fragile, and you know that everything they become depends on. You not screwing up? Nari listened, her crystal form slowly brightening as her power returned. But she was not using it as a weapon now, she was just listening. When Mira was 3, she got really sick, Jiho continued. High fever, trouble breathing. We rushed her to the hospital at 2 in the morning. I sat in that waiting room for 6 hours, imagining the worst. That was scarier than anything you could show me, because it was real. It was happening. But she recovered. Yeah, she did. Turned out to be just a bad infection. Antibiotics cleared it right up. But for those 6 hours, I lived with the possibility that I might lose the most important thing in my life. You learn to function with that kind of fear, or you fall apart. Nari shook her head. This makes no sense. Fear is supposed to paralyze. It is supposed to control. For us, fear is information, Jiho said. It tells us what matters. I'm afraid. When my kids are late coming home from school, so I know I love them. I'm afraid when business is slow, so I know I need to work harder. I'm afraid when Soo-jin is quiet, so I know I need to ask what's wrong. You use fear as a tool? We live with it as a constant companion. Every human does. We're afraid of death, of failure, of being alone. We're afraid of not being good enough, of letting people down, of making the wrong choices. But we get up every morning anyway and try to do better. Dr. Hana Lim was taking notes as fast as she could. Through the monitoring equipment, she could hear every word of the conversation. This was the breakthrough she had been hoping for. A real explanation of human psychology from a human perspective. Station Commander Vexila was less interested in the science. How much longer is this going to take? We need information about the weapons shipment. There was no weapons shipment, Hana said without looking up from her notes. Captain Park is telling the truth. He was delivering medical supplies. How? Can you be sure? Because he just explained exactly why he wouldn't smuggle weapons. He has a daughter who might need medical care someday. He wouldn't do anything to harm hospitals or medical facilities. In the cell, Nari was struggling to understand what she was hearing. If humans live with so much fear, how do you accomplish anything? How do you build civilizations? Because we're more afraid of giving up than we are of failing, Jiho said. I'm scared my business might fail, but I'm more scared of what happens to my family if I don't try. I'm afraid my kids might get hurt, but I'm more afraid of not letting them live their lives. This is... Nari searched for words. This is insane. Yeah, probably. But it works for us. Nari stood up slowly. Her legs felt weak, which was strange. She had never felt physically weak before. I need to understand something. You say you carry all these fears constantly? Pretty much, yeah. The fear of death? Every day. But everybody dies eventually. The trick is to do something worthwhile while you're here. The fear of meaninglessness? All the time. But then my son tells me about his day at school, or my daughter shows me a drawing she made, and I remember what gives my life meaning. The fear of being alone in an uncaring universe? Jiho laughed. That's the big one, isn't it? Yeah, I think about that. But then I remember that I'm not alone. I have my family, my friends, my community, and if the universe doesn't care about us, well, we care about each other. That's enough. Nari's crystal body began to shake. Not from power, but from something she had never experienced before, the beginning of understanding. She had spent her entire life believing that fear was weakness, that terror was a tool to control the weak-minded. She had thought that the strongest beings were those who felt no fear at all, but this human was showing her something impossible. He was not fearless, he was full of fear. He carried more terror in his daily life than most species experienced, in their worst nightmares. And somehow that made him stronger, not weaker. I do not understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. How can you be so afraid and so brave at the same time? Jiho thought about that for a moment. I guess because being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared and you do the right thing anyway. Something inside Nari's mind snapped. Not broke, transformed. She had been asking the wrong question this entire time. She looked at Jiho with new eyes. Eyes that were beginning to see something that terrified her more than anything she had ever encountered. She was looking at a being that had made peace with cosmic horror. A creature that carried the weight of existential dread like a badge of honor. The question came out of her before she could stop it. Her voice was shaking, desperate, afraid. Why don't you fear me, human? Jiho looked at her for a long moment. When he smiled, it was not the friendly smile from before. It was something warmer, sadder, and infinitely more frightening. Fear you, he said quietly. Commander, I've been married to Su-Jin for 23 years. Jiho's words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Nari thought she knew about the universe. She stared at him, waiting for him to continue, but he just sat there with that strange, gentle smile. I do not understand, she said finally. What does your marriage have to do with anything? Everything, Jiho said, leaning back against the wall. You want to know what real fear looks like? Try being responsible for another person's happiness for over 20 years. Try making decisions that affect not just you, but someone you love more than your own life. Nari's crystal body flickered with confusion. But that is just daily life. Exactly. Jiho's smile grew wider and somehow more unsettling. That's what you don't understand. What you think of as ultimate terror, we call Tuesday. He stood up and began pacing the small cell. Let me tell you about real fear, Commander. Real fear is watching your wife cry because she thinks she's not a good mother. Real fear is seeing your child get on the school transport for the first time and knowing you can't protect them anymore. Real fear is lying awake at 3 in the morning wondering if you're making enough money to pay for your daughter's education. These are small concerns, Nari protested, but her voice sounded uncertain. Are they? Jiho stopped pacing and looked directly at her. When Mira was 5, she asked me why some people are mean to each other. I had to explain war and hatred and all the terrible things people do to each other. I had to do it in a way that wouldn't give her nightmares, but also wouldn't lie to her about how dangerous the world can be. That is difficult. When Daeho turned 16, he wanted to join the Space Academy. I had to let him apply, even though I knew it meant he might end up in danger, even though every instinct I had told me to keep him safe at home. Because holding him back would hurt him more than letting him go. Nari sat down heavily. You chose to let him face danger? That's what parents do. We face our worst fears every day because love demands it. You think you're scary? I've stood in hospital waiting rooms while doctors worked on my family. I've sent my children out into a world that might hurt them. I've watched my wife struggle with problems I couldn't fix. Dr. Hannah Lim was frantically typing notes on her computer. Through the monitoring system, she could see that Nari's power readings were fluctuating wildly. The alien commander was having some kind of psychological breakdown. Dr. Lim, Station Commander Vexila said, "What is happening down there?" Captain Park is inadvertently demonstrating something that could change how we understand psychology. Across the galaxy, Hannah replied without stopping her typing. He's showing that humans don't just resist fear, they metabolize it. What does that mean? Think of it like a muscle. When you exercise a muscle, it gets stronger. When you expose it to stress, it adapts. Humans have been exercising their fear response for thousands of generations. They've turned existential terror into a survival tool. On the screen, they could see Jiho continuing his explanation. Nari looked smaller somehow, despite being twice his size. Every human parent knows a specific kind of fear, Jiho was saying. It's the fear that you're not good enough, that you're going to mess up your kids somehow, that you're going to fail the people who depend on you. And this does not destroy you. It motivates us. When Sujin was pregnant with Mira, I was terrified. I didn't know how to be a father. I read every book I could find. I talked to other parents. I learned because the fear of failing her was stronger than the fear of trying. Nari's voice was very small when she spoke. You have lived with this level of psychological pressure for 23 years? Longer. I was afraid of asking Sujin out. I was afraid of proposing. I was afraid of the wedding, afraid of buying our first house, afraid of starting a business. Fear has been my constant companion since I was old enough to understand that actions have consequences. How do you function? Jiho sat back down, his expression becoming serious. You know what the really scary part is? It gets worse. The more people you love, the more you have to fear. When it was just me and Sujin, I only had to worry about 2 people. Now I've got kids, and that means I worry about their friends, their teachers, their futures. The fear multiplies. But you still choose to love more people? Of course. Because fear without love is just paranoia. But fear because of love? That's what makes us human. Nari stood up abruptly. She began pacing, the cell like a caged animal, her crystal body casting wild shadows on the walls. This is impossible. You are describing a species that lives in constant psychological torture. Not torture. Training. Training for what? Jiho's smile disappeared completely. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and very serious. For everything else. I do not understand. You showed me visions of my family dying. That was supposed to break me, right? But I've already imagined that scenario 1,000 times. Every time Sujin is late coming home from work, I picture the worst. Every time the kids don't answer their phones, I think about accidents. It's not because I want to. It's because my brain won't let me stop. That sounds like mental illness. Maybe it is. But it's also preparation. When something really bad happens, humans don't fall apart. We've already been there in our heads. We've already figured out how we'd handle it. Nari stopped pacing. You think about disaster constantly? Every day. What if I lose my job? What if someone gets sick? What if there's an accident? What if we can't pay our bills? What if the kids get hurt? What if Sujin stops loving me? What if I'm not strong enough when my family needs me? And You can still sleep at night? Most nights. Because worrying about problems doesn't solve them. You acknowledge the fear, you make plans for what you can control, and you accept what you can't. Dr. Hannah Lim suddenly understood what she was witnessing. She turned to Commander Vexilla with excitement in her eyes. Sir, I need to get down to that cell immediately. Why? Because we're watching the galaxy's most feared interrogator discover that she's been trying to scare someone who scares himself worse than she ever could. Captain Park isn't immune to fear. He's overdosed on it. He's built up such a tolerance that what breaks other species is just background noise to him. In the cell, Nari had backed against the wall. Her crystal body was dim and fractured looking. You carry all of this pain voluntarily? We carry it because we have to. Because the alternative is not caring about anything, and that's not living. That's just existing. But how do you bear it? Jiho stood up and walked to the door of the cell. He pressed his hand against the metal and spoke without turning around. You want to know the secret? The thing that lets us carry all this fear and keep going? Yes. We know we're not carrying it alone. Every human everywhere is dealing with the same thing. We're all scared all the time about the people and things we love. And somehow, knowing that everyone else is just as terrified as we are makes it bearable. He turned back to face her, and his smile returned. But now Nari could see it for what it really was. It wasn't the smile of someone who felt no fear. It was the smile of someone who had made peace with being afraid. You're not even in the top 100 things that keep me awake at night, Commander. Nari's legs gave out. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor again, staring up at this impossible creature. For the first time in her existence, she understood what true terror felt like. She was looking at a being that had weaponized fear itself. The door to the cell burst open. Dr. Hannah Lim rushed in, followed by Station Commander Vexla and 3 security guards. They found Nari sitting on the floor, her crystal body dim and flickering like a dying light bulb. Jiho was standing calmly by the wall, looking concerned. Commander Nari, Vexla called out. Are you injured? Nari looked up at them with eyes that seemed to see too much. I am not injured. I am enlightened. What happened here? Vexla demanded, looking between Nari and Jiho. Captain Park explained. His species to me, Nari said slowly. I now understand why my interrogation failed. Dr. Hannah Lim knelt down next to Nari. Commander, your power readings went completely chaotic. We thought you might be having some kind of breakdown. I was, Nari admitted. Everything I thought I knew about fear, about strength, about how minds work, it was wrong. She stood up slowly, her crystal body gradually brightening. Dr. Lim, you have studied humans. Did you know about this? About what, specifically? They live in a constant state of psychological pressure that would drive most species insane. They carry fears that should paralyze them. And somehow, this makes them stronger, not weaker. Hannah nodded. I suspected something like that. Human anxiety levels are off the charts compared to most species. But they still function normally, which shouldn't be possible. It is more than that, Nari said, her voice filled with something like awe. They have turned existential terror into a tool. They use fear to motivate themselves, to protect their families, to make better decisions. Jiho cleared his throat politely. Excuse me, but could someone tell me what's going on? Am I still under arrest? Commander Vexilla looked at him uncertainly. That depends. Were you carrying weapons to rebel colonies? No, sir. I was delivering medicine to a hospital. I can provide all the documentation you need. He is telling the truth, Nari said firmly. Humans are incapable of lying effectively under the kind of psychological pressure I subjected him to. If he were guilty, he would have confessed within minutes. How can you be sure? Because, Nari said, I now understand that humans confess their worst fears to themselves every day. They live with guilt, anxiety, and self-doubt as constant companions. If he had done something wrong, he would have already punished himself, worse than we ever could. Dr. Hana Lim was taking notes rapidly. This could revolutionize our understanding of human psychology. Captain Park, would you be willing to participate in some non-invasive studies? I guess so, Jiho said. But I really need to get home soon. My wife is expecting me, and if I'm late, she'll worry. And when Sujin worries, she makes kimchi. A lot of kimchi. More kimchi than any family should have to eat. Despite everything that had happened, Nari found herself laughing. It was a sound, like crystals chiming in the wind. Even now, even after everything, you are afraid of disappointing your wife. Well, yeah. Happy wife, happy life. That's universal, right? Among humans, perhaps. But Captain Park, do you understand what you have done here today? Jiho shrugged. Had a conversation? You have shattered the foundational understanding of fear that has governed galactic psychology for millennia. Oh, sorry about that. Commander Vexila was still trying to process what he had witnessed. Dr. Lim, what are the implications of this discovery? Huge, Hana said, not looking up from her notes. Every species in the Federation uses fear as a control mechanism. Military discipline, law enforcement, diplomacy. It all relies on the threat of consequences creating fear, and fear creating compliance. And humans are immune to this? Not immune. Saturated. They're already carrying so much fear that external threats barely register. It's like trying to make someone wet when they're already underwater. Nari walked over to Jiho. Up close, she towered over him, but somehow he seemed like the larger presence in the room. Captain Park, I owe you an apology. For what? For underestimating your species, for thinking that fear was a weakness to be exploited rather than a strength to be respected. We all have our jobs to do, Jiho said kindly. You were just doing yours. My job was built on a false understanding of how minds work. I may need to find a new career. Dr. Hana Lim looked up from her notes. Actually, Commander Nari, we could use your help. If we're going to study this phenomenon properly, we need someone who understands fear from the other side. You would trust me to work with humans? You just spent hours trying to break Captain Park's mind and failed completely. Now you're apologizing to him and questioning your entire worldview. I think that shows remarkable adaptability. 3 days. Later, news of the failed interrogation had spread throughout the Federation. Not the details, those were classified, but the basic fact that humanity's first serious diplomatic crisis had ended with apologies and research partnerships instead of confessions and punishments. Captain Jiho Park was released with full honors and an escort home. The Federation also gave him a formal apology and a commendation for advancing interspecies understanding through remarkable patience and courage. As his ship prepared to leave the station, Jiho found Commander Nari waiting for him at the docking bay. I wanted to say goodbye, she said. And to thank you. Thank me for what? For teaching me that strength is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to carry it with grace. Jiho smiled. You know, you should meet my wife sometime. She'd like you. She's always saying that the bravest thing anyone can do is get up each morning and try to be a good person, even when the world seems scary. Perhaps I will take you up on that offer. Anytime. Our house is always open to friends. Nari watched as the lucky star undocked and flew away toward human space. She had a report to write for the Federation Council, but she was still working on how to explain what she had learned. How do you tell an entire galaxy that their understanding of fear is backwards? How do you explain that the species they thought was weak might actually be the strongest of all? She returned to her office and began typing, Report on Human Interrogation Resistance. After extensive testing, I must recommend immediate reclassification of humanity from minor species to requires further study. Human resistance to fear-based interrogation appears to be absolute, not due to courage or training, but due to psychological saturation. They carry levels of existential anxiety that would incapacitate most species, yet function normally. They have weaponized their own terror and turned it into a survival tool. I recommend extreme caution in future dealings with humans, not because they are aggressive, but because they are incomprehensible. They make us question fundamental assumptions about consciousness, fear, and what it means to be alive in an indifferent universe. She paused in her typing and looked out the window, at the stars. Somewhere out there, Captain Jiho Park was flying home to a family that loved him and worried about him and made too much kimchi when he was late. And somehow that was the most terrifying thought of all. Back on Earth, Jiho Park walked through the front door of his house to find his wife Sue Jin waiting for him with a concerned expression and the smell of kimchi heavy in the air. "You're 3 days late," she said, crossing her arms. "I was worried sick." "Sorry, honey. Work got complicated, but I'm home now." "Good. Dinner's ready. Wash your hands." Jiho kissed his wife's cheek and went to wash up. His daughter Mira ran up to hug his legs, chattering about school. His son Daeho waved from the couch where he was doing homework. This was his life. This was what he carried his fears for. This was what made him stronger than any alien interrogator could understand. "Dad," Mira said as they sat down to dinner, "what did you do at work this week?" "Oh, just had some interesting conversations with new people," Jiho replied, serving himself kimchi. "How was school?" And life went on, exactly as it should with all its beautiful, terrible, perfectly ordinary fears.